Today we're looking at some NHL trade rumors focusing on the Columbus Blue Jackets and the futures of guys like Patrik Laine, Max Domi, John Tortorella, even Zach Werenski and Seth Jones. The NHL also is pondering some changes to the schedule for next year, and are some NHL teams already having buyer's remorse for their NHL Trade Deadline acquisitions? We'll discuss the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about. Before we jump into the trade rumors here today, I want to look at some information regarding potential schedule changes for next year. The NHL GMs have been having their latest rounds of GM meetings. Unfortunately, they're doing it a little bit different this year with having it remotely through Zoom. But there are some talks about the agenda that they're looking at, maybe considering making some schedule changes for next year. Now, of course, a lot of this is going to likely be left up in the air here for a little while, not too long, but they do have some time to get this sorted out, given that they need to kind of get a little bit more time to determine, can there be border crossings? Can the Canadian teams resume travel back and forth? There's a lot of question marks that are still going to be a little while before that can be answered. But obviously right now with this year in divisional play, I think it's fair to say that the season's been fairly successful. I think teams are certainly anxious to maybe get things changed up a little bit, play some different teams, but possibly still have a big focus on divisional play. And could they even expand the season to be a little bit longer? So there's some talk. See for Gordon Miller here at TSN, getting some information on GM meetings, saying that they're talking about a variety of things. Obviously, nothing set in stone. It's going to be a while before we even know if any of this will come to be. But there is talk of possibly extending the year from an 82-game schedule over to an 84-game schedule. That's a possibility, especially with another team coming into the mix. And there's also talk that they could focus the schedule mostly having a lot more divisional play. I mean, you would still have, you would still play against other teams and other divisions in the other conference, but just not quite as much before, and really put more of a focus on divisions. And then at the same time, have a divisional playoff format like we have now. I mean, obviously right now they're going to have the top 4 teams in each division make it, and then battle your way through the end of your division. You win your division, you go on to the Final Four to play for the Stanley Cup here in between the semifinals and the finals. Now, that could change. They very well could also revert back to the old conference format where you have a 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, and 4 versus 5. So the top 8 make it. You could have different, rules around who makes it regarding all the division winners, the top 3, a couple of wild cards. You could still have play-ins. They're looking at all of that stuff, but I think it's fair to say, seeing the rivalries really built up this year because of the format and out of necessity, that there is a possibility we could see a lot more focus on divisional play into next year for sure. So we'll have to wait and see as they talk about this further and decide what's going to happen. Like I said, obviously there's some external factors there that they may not be able to control that might kind of dictate what they do for next year. But for those that are assuming they're going to automatically go back to the 82-game schedule in the old playoff format, it's not a complete given. There are some other things here on the table that are being explored. So we'll have to wait and see how things go in that regard. Now, as I mentioned as well, we want to take a look at some trade rumors for the Blue Jackets, and are some teams having buyer's remorse? I mean, 2 prime examples here of some deadline deals that are right now not working out very well is the Montreal Canadiens and the New York Islanders. Now, when it comes to the Islanders, they acquired Kyle Palmieri and Travis Zajac, and they did it a little bit early. They didn't wait until the actual deadline day. They got a bit of a jump on things, and they gave up a pretty significant price tag, although I do think they get a pretty good deal out of it. But still, giving up a first-round pick is still a significant piece to always trade. And right now, things are not going the greatest. Travis Zajac's become a healthy scratch. Kyle Palmieri has 1 goal in 8 games, and it just hasn't been the greatest fit like they were hoping for. So obviously the Islanders themselves are still on track to be a playoff team. I don't think they're in really too much danger that way, but they are in a really tough, tight division here. And when you make these deadline deals and you have obviously some team chemistry that you're kind of messing with a little bit, some players come in and fit in like a glove and just take right off, and others start slow. I mean, it makes sense that some guys just need more time to adjust to their new teammates, their new line mates. You're living in a new city. There's a lot that goes into it, and you can't expect a player to jump in on game 1 and just take off firing at all cylinders here and be a hit right off. Sometimes it happens, a lot of times it doesn't, and it's just, you just don't know. I mean, there's still time for these guys to kind of get themselves acclimated and get things going in a more positive direction before we get to the playoffs. It's way too early to say that it was a really bad bust trade, but if you're not really showing to be a better team after everything, then it makes you wonder if maybe you should have pulled the trigger, or should you have considered a different deal or something like that. So we'll have to see. But right now, I think that the Islanders might be having a little bit of buyer's remorse. That deal is not looking so good here at the moment. But New Jersey, on the other hand, I think is, obviously we're happy to move on from those pending UFAs that they likely aren't re-signing, get some future assets out of it, and are moving on from there. Now, in terms of the Montreal Canadiens, it's not only created a problem with Eric Staal in Montreal not fitting in the greatest, but he's created some other issues as well with putting some real handcuffs and restrictions on the lineup. Because of those moves, it really handcuffed them salary cap-wise, and now they're very limited on what they can do to move players in or out. So it really complicates things. Now, the Habs obviously did a lot of their heavy lifting in the offseason. They made acquisitions through trade like Josh Anderson and Jake Allen. They signed Tyler Toffoli as a free agent. They made a lot of good moves, and those moves have been there all year, and they're paying off quite nicely. When it comes to their deadline acquisitions, right now John Merrill seems to be a decent pickup. I think he's only played a couple games for them, but and I've watched both of them, and they've looked pretty good with him in the lineup. Like, he's been pretty decent and solid back there. I don't really have too many complaints about Merrill. I don't think it's fair to say that he's caused any disruption. Like, he's been able to come in and play well. I mean, Brett Kulak is the defenseman that's been sitting out lately, which I was a little bit puzzled by, but you know what? Merrill's fit in nicely, so we can't, it's nothing to do with him. Now, on the forward front, though, Eric Staal, he got off to a good start, scored the overtime game-winning goal in the first game, but really ever since then has not really looked great. I mean, he's caused turnovers. He's just not playing with enough pace. It just really seems like his game has fallen off, and it's just not what Montreal was expecting to get out of him when they made that acquisition and gave up the draft picks to make the acquisition here from the Buffalo Sabres. Right now, it looks like Buffalo might very well end up getting the better end of this deal, but when the deal first went down, I thought Eric Staal to Montreal was going to be a genius move. I thought bringing in a veteran guy like him to really, add that extra dimension to the center ice position was going to be really big and important for the young guys like Suzuki and Kakaniemi. But Staal just has really not been good at all as of late. And the worst of it is they have a guy like Cole Caulfield who's been tearing it up. He wins the Hobey Baker Award after another really strong college season, signs, turns pro, gets a few games in the American Hockey League, absolutely tears it up down there. They like to bring him into the lineup. Obviously, when they signed him, they likely had a verbal agreement that they would get him into at least a handful of games here down the stretch. And they can't, because they have no room salary cap space wise, and because they're into long-term injury reserve relief, his full cap hit counts, not just the entry-level contract, like the bonus portion as well. So like they can get other guys in that are making like $900,000 or $1 million easier than Cole Caulfield. So having some veteran guys there like Staal that are not really working out is causing some issues. I mean, Dominic Ducharme hasn't had a winning record really since he's taken over from Claude Julien. You have to wonder if Marc Bergevin might be having some regrets here. I mean, the things have not changed overly well for the positive because since all those moves were made. So, could they go back in time and redo that Eric Staal trade? I can't help but think that Marc Bergevin might wish he had that one back. Most of the moves he's made in the last year or two has been really good. He can't complain too much about the job he's done. But to set this team up for the playoffs, what he was going after, I think was the right idea. And I don't know if any of us really could have predicted that Staal had really fallen off that much. Maybe we gave him too much credit, saying that Buffalo was such a bad team this year that it wasn't really all him. It was more being on a bad team. And you know what, though? All of these players that played on a bad team kind of contributed to it being a bad team. And I guess maybe he was cutting too much slack and things are not working out. But I think it's fair to say that they're having some buyer's remorse. And it just goes to show you, when you make deadline deals, you got to be awfully careful because they don't always work out. And there's still time for things to get turned around. But at this point, I'd be shocked if they turn around to the point where Eric Staal turns into an absolute stud for Montreal. Just don't see it happening, unfortunately. And hopefully for their sake, it doesn't cause them their playoff position, because right now they're in a 3-game set with the Calgary Flames. They lost game 1 last night, If the Flames manage to sweep that series from them, they're going to make it awfully interesting and will have a shot at knocking the Habs out of their playoff spot. So we'll have to see what happens here down the stretch. Now, of course, when it comes to today's trade rumors, I'm mostly focusing on the Jackets. Now, we touched a little bit on yesterday on the future of Tortorella, maybe a goaltender like Elvis Merzlikins after he spoke out about, having it really being mentally challenging, and he doesn't want to end up like the Buffalo Sabres, and he was really concerned about where things were heading in the direction of the team. But there's other reports too from Aaron Portzline, who covers the Blue Jackets closely, in a mailbag segment, looking at the future of some of these players, and you really have to wonder what guys like Max Domi, Patrik Laine, and even Werenski and Jones to an exception here what's their future hold. Now, the priority number one for Columbus this offseason, I think, needs to be discussing the future of Seth Jones and determining if he is going to extend and remain a big part of that team's future. Because if he's going to be pending unrestricted free agent in another year's time, and if he doesn't want to re-sign and he decides he wants to up and leave, that's going to be a big blow to this team, even further knocking them down even more. So there's talk about maybe looking at trading a guy like Zach Werenski, that they might have to get some more firepower up front. They desperately are missing that top center iceman, and Zach Werenski's a young enough, offensively capable enough defenseman that he might be able to fetch them the guy that they're looking for. So it might have to come to a situation where they consider that. But if they trade Werenski now and then they don't get Jones re-signed and he leaves via free agency in a year, they're going to be royally screwed in that back end after having one of the top D pairs in the NHL just suddenly up and go like that. So that's not something they want to see. So ideally, step one is get Jones re-signed if you can and determine the future of him. If he's not going to stay, or you don't get that feeling, maybe he ends up being the guy to go, and Werenski's the guy that ends up staying. I don't know, but they're easily your top two trade chips back there on the blue line to get some help up front. So it's really hard to say what they do, but they need a top center in the worst way to play with guys like Patrik Laine. Some are saying that Patrik Laine is lazy, doesn't care, he's having a hard time with Tortorella. According to Aaron Portzline in his recent reports, though, he feels that Laine cares tremendously, and it's not an issue about that at all. There's a pretty good chance he'll sign a one-year deal as an RFA. But, will Jarmo Kekalainen decide to move on from some of these players and really shake things up further? Will John Tortorella be back? There's so many question marks with this Blue Jackets team, just a couple years removed from getting their first ever playoff series victory. It's really a shame to kind of see what's happened to that team. But that's why at the same time, though, when that was happening, I kind of said I didn't think they should go in as much as they did and give up all those future assets that they did to make that happen, because I didn't see the long-term viability there. And right now they're exactly where I expected them to be. I didn't expect they'd be this low, but still, I knew they'd be struggling, now to try to regroup here after everything they went through and had all those pending UFAs walk out the door. They've lost so much in the past two off seasons that are they going to lose more with guys like Jones and Werenski possibly on the move? But at the end of the day, they need to determine the future of those guys and go from there. But Max Domi hasn't fit. You could make an argument that Laine hasn't fit. You could make an argument that a lot of it's on Tortorella. Maybe a new fresh voice behind the bench will change things. But there's a lot of talk out there that the Blue Jackets are going to be a very busy team this offseason. They're going to be one of the top teams to watch when it comes to making trades, and we're talking significant ones. And it's just a matter of who's on the move. So let me know your thoughts on Columbus. Do you see guys like Laine or Domi getting moved again? Does it make sense to consider moving one of your top D in Jones or Werenski to get a top center? I mean, obviously that's what they did years ago. They traded Johansson for Jones. So now they almost need to go the opposite way here and get something going, because they just don't have enough ability to put the puck in the net in the forward group, and that's causing them a lot of issues here. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.